Hey, good morning, Professor Tootle.
Good morning.
Hey, Bart, you're going to have lots to weigh in as our constitutional legal scholar, and I would say you probably don't accept that title, right?
Right, actually.
But you are a lawyer and you have a lot of legislative experience, so
Right.
tangentially, you're experienced in the ways of American law.
That is true, yes.
Okay, cool, cool. Hey, so Professor, I've got something. I think I've only done this one or two other times. I have zero questions for you today. Zero.
Be a
Uh,
short show.
Yeah, well,
Well,
it could be, but we'll see. What I mean is prepared questions in advance. I almost always have 3 or 4 themes at least, and then I have some thoughts on questions within each theme. This show, I actually have 0 questions in advance. I'm gonna just think along with you.
Okay.
And so in some ways, it's just a very informal, casual conversation between 2 semi-educated, that's modest, I assume very educated. I mean, we have God, between the 3 of us, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, at least 7 degrees past college, past high school, I mean. So I guess we're more than semi-educated, which in today's world is a weakness. So I guess I shouldn't have pointed out our flaws. Um, just guys in this instance chatting about citizenship and the Constitution and its relevance today and how to translate its importance. I mean, but I didn't have those. I've just made those questions up just right now. Um,
Okay.
I'd kind of like to get your thoughts on the relevance of the United States Constitution in today's dialogue, and not what President Trump's doing, and not this on immigration or that on trans stuff or the military on this. And we can talk about specifics. I'm talking about more of just process. Is it good to have a written constitution? Does it mean anything today? Bart can add in legal stuff. Well, of course it does. You're going to get sued or not sued, or I mean, of course there's practical conversations. I'm actually more interested in culture, though. Does it? Does anyone read the Constitution anymore? I mean, maybe they study it in high school or college. I don't know. Can you just give me some gut reactions?
Yeah, I mean, the gut reaction is to quote the movie Club Paradise with Robin Williams and Twiggy and Jimmy Cliff, a really
I
bad
don't think I've
comedy
seen it.
movie from the early to mid 80s. I don't remember when it came out, but there was a joke that Robin Williams told in the middle of that movie that I always thought was funny and appropriate. And or maybe this was just an old Robin Williams joke and I'm conflating it with that movie. But there was he had some joke where he would say where somebody said they have constitutions, and he said, yeah, but they're written in pencil. um and I always thought that was a a good line because and then because it illustrates the importance of what Abraham Lincoln was always trying to explain to the American people. And he's not the only one, but he's the one that a listener would be the most familiar with, I think. But uh, and that is that the Constitution is there in order to enact the ideals of the Declaration, and that is what joins together the culture and the system. That 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 what's the law itself is a piece of paper until people believe in it, and that we're an ideological nation state, and that means that we only exist as long as we are a people who actually believe in the Constitution. And it's the very basis of our nationality and legal existence as a nation state. So I've been, sort of, I was jokingly worried about this 20 years ago when I would say, um, well, the majority of Americans um, can't, can't name a single justice on the Supreme Court. And I remember when the majority of Americans couldn't name the three branches of government, you know, and I don't mean know anything about them. I just, they couldn't name them. Right.
Mhm.
And so at that point, I began to say, well, are we still, an ideological nation state? This is what you're probably more, and Bart, you're more familiar with calling this rule of law, not just that the law is there, but that it actually has purchase within our society. Um, and, the laws only work if you follow them. And I remember just being worried and thinking, is America nothing more than just a place to hold a Super Bowl every year? Is it just for the Doritos spectacular? Is we can't simply inertia will last a little bit, and I guess we need to have Professor Jeff Bloodworth, back on this because on this topic, I think, because he and I, many years ago, I mean, when we were just grad students, we would sit around and get drunk and think about this because he was a very committed liberal Democrat, and we were worried about the same thing, you know, from different perspectives, but uh, and that is that people didn't seem like people believed in the system, and that people were actively against the idea of learning, and that the takeover of the intellectual traditions by critical theorists, that which is a form of, I mean, it's a useful form of literary and legal criticism, but when applied to politics and culture, is a form of totalitarianism and a rejection of pluralism. It's a rejection of the balancing of many rights, and a belief that says that all of politics needs to be reconciled to one thing, and there is no truth. Whereas our entire system of government is based on the idea that no human being has a monopoly on truth, and that we need to have a system, a constitution that balances peacefully between our many rights. And that means that blood blood money and I, Professor Bloodworth and I could sit around, and we knew that that by about 1:30 in the morning, after we'd had a few belts under us, that what we were really talking about was that I slightly favored the rights of the minority over the will of the majority in 51 out of 100 times, and he slightly favored the will of the majority over the rights of the minority 51 out of 100 times, because that's how two pluralists who believe in the same system can work together. And when we saw over the decades, because it was already happening by the time I was in grad school, and as historians, he started out looking more specifically at the 1970s, and he started his research in that area before I did. But we both took note, I would say, that it had taken hold within the Democratic Party starting in the late 60s, early and 70s, and really became entrenched post Watergate, and essentially the Democrats couldn't shake it off. And us smug Republicans, thought, oh, well, we can fight off this, scourge, but they sort of came into the Republican Party starting in kind of the mid 90s. And it turns out that we were just delaying it. Some little bit of conservatism still prevented the takeover of the Republican Party.
You lost me slightly, though, Professor. So expand on what happened in the 70s with Democrats.
Well, you had a lot of radical ideas that were pushed by intellectuals post World War II, post-colonialism, postmodernism, post-structuralism, critical theory, and a rejection of the idea of truth, and an embrace of power and violence, and people arguing for those things within an intellectual tradition. And they were present in academics, but the institutions themselves were strong enough to withstand, and like academic environments are a very liberal environment where you say, okay, well, you're a crank, but I'm interested in hearing your argument. Let's bounce this around. But post Watergate, they took over the institutions, so they were no longer a somewhere. I would just say between the 70s and the 90s, the institutions were simply taken over, so that they weren't a sort of like, hey, let's invite in this one crank so he can we can bounce ideas off of him. They were in charge, and they didn't tolerate any dissent. So, and they made sure that no liberals and no conservatives would ever get hired.
And you're referring to education as an example, not the only place.
Yes, but that was the leading edge of culture.
Okay.
So I would say we saw it in academics, and they became permanent in academics beginning in I'd say the fight sort of ran from the mid seven, I don't know, some people say late 60s, but certainly by the post Watergate, um, early to mid 70s, running up through, and I guess the first time it was really I noticed that they were politically effective was in the 2000s during the Gulf War, but there
Mm.
were still enough old liberals around that you could say, oh, well, let's have a debate between this person. But, the old liberals were retiring in the 90s and 2000s, and the people who replaced them were radicals who didn't believe, not only didn't believe in dissent, they didn't tolerate dissent. They didn't. And so every department became ideologically pure, to the extent that, like, there are some academic disciplines that I want to say anthropology, but I think in the last study that there are no Republican anthropologists in higher education. I mean, it's just stunning. If we did this to any other group of people in America, you would say this is systemic discrimination. It's the definition of systemic discrimination, to say that we have this one institution in American life where half of Americans can't participate in it. Like it's just remarkable. But because they were at the leading edge of culture, then they're the ones who are setting up the standards of success for everybody else.
In private sector and
Yeah,
government.
yeah. And so if you went to college, you soon learned this is how you get ahead. This is what a smart person thinks. And if you don't think this way, you're a dumb person. Um, and it's very difficult to be the one person in the room who sticks your hand up and says, especially when you're the last one and you saw what happened to all the other ones, right? They were, once the persecutions
But,
start, then
Professor,
everybody
it did
counts.
change. The Republican or conservative movement against liberals in higher education is vast. It's been relentless for the last 20 or 30 years. My whole professional career, I've heard Republicans attack higher education and liberals and indoctrination, et cetera, et cetera. And surprise, surprise, they won. They're dismantling everything. So talk about, keep on the theme of the
Well,
Constitution.
and I guess that's an important thing of like, why did conservatives abandon it? Uh, and conservatives abandoned the constitutional tradition, um, because, well, I guess I'd say two things. When the biases of institutions became overwhelmingly obvious, um, nobody listened to them, and you could sort of feel it happen among politicians and friends and colleagues, just one by one becoming radicalized by what was happening in their own lives. And one by one, they became convinced that there was no hope, that there was no point in trying to defend the constitutional order, that what we had to do was do exactly to them what they were doing to us.
Okay, now
And
that resonates with me in the last 10 years, and not even necessarily coinciding with Trump, but it seems like it's at least in parallel. So that does resonate with me. You think that Republicans are more important conservatives? Because I'm not sure about positive about Republicans. I used to be positive, but now I don't think so. I used to be sure about conservatives until about 3 years ago or 2 years ago. I thought there was a ton of people that still believed in the Constitution. But what you're saying now resonates with me just in the last year or two.
Yeah.
Um,
But I mean, 1992 was a long time ago. And I
yeah,
remember in 1992, when I was 18 years old, hearing the older political operatives after George Bush visited some sort of supermarket demonstration where he, you know, said, "Oh wow, thank you for inviting me, and what wonderful scanners you have here." And
yeah,
that story was spun in the media as Bush is so out of touch with America that he has never seen a supermarket scanner. And I just remember hearing those old grizzled political operatives just saying like, "There's no point in engaging like media or education. There's just no point. If they can take something as innocuous as President Bush, um, you know, saying, it's not, oh, hey, wow, nice supermarket scanner you've got, like being polite essentially to a demonstration of a new scanning technology, and that was somehow going to be used not by the Clinton campaign. You would expect the Clinton campaign to spin and exaggerate, but it was the media outlets that were doing it. And when Romney, um, you just heard mainstream media outlets attacking him for saying binders full of women, and you just think, well, what's the point? I can't talk to you. I'm telling you, it's like we're looking at a rule book that says you shall, um, approach truth by looking at the evidence and summarizing the evidence. And you say, okay, are you going to do that? Yeah, I'm going to do that, right? And then you look at that debate, and then one person says, uh, one person hears Mitt Romney say, I did everything I could to keep, files on qualified women to make sure that women always had an opportunity to rise within my administration when I was a governor, which is the truth.
right.
Like that is the truth of what he said, uh,
But it said it was some kind of weird perversion or
yeah.
something.
And right. And to pretend that what he said instead was he's so demeaning to women, he thinks he can put women in binders.
Right.
Like that's bizarre. There's no point in talking to that
Professor,
person anymore. Yeah.
Professor, let me give you an analogy on that too to see if I'm listening. I remember, I've been politically active since 1984 when I first ran for high school government, but more politically active in college government, etc., working for the mayor in college, and then really professionally politically active in 1989. So I've been around a long time now. And I've always thought the League of Women Voters was liberal. From my earliest memories of the 80s, I thought they're liberal. Now, they're supposedly nonpartisan, and I guess they kind of are, but no, they're mostly liberal. So I remember that change when candidates that I was managing, et cetera, campaign managing, said, well, okay, I'll go, but I don't want to I ain't going because they're actually communists or they're not going to treat me fairly. I remember that switch in their head.
Right.
I don't care. They can write up some negative thing that I didn't show up. That's better than showing up and being portrayed poorly. I remember that switch. Is that the kind of thing that you're talking about in people's mind?
Sure. Yeah. But in a way, I'm so nostalgic for liberal bias. I dream of an audience of the League of Women Voters now. Like I wish I could plead my case to a jury of
Liberal.
to
Yeah.
have old liberal biases. Those are the people who've all been thrown out. The League of Women Voters would not get hired. Their ideology would not get hired to you know teach in a college outside.
Well,
I should say,
well,
the funny thing is, I caution. I want to say outside of the hard sciences, by the way, because it is true that we've managed to keep standards. I mean, it's not great. If you brought somebody in from the hard sciences, maybe they'd complain. But like, um, what we're talking about is essentially all of the elements of higher education and culture that deal with culture, not science.
chemistry is still chemistry and biology is still biology.
Yes, yes. I think we have pretty good data on that. But to give you an idea, is there a downstream effect of this? I, I have a friend who teaches at a local high school, and they had a meeting last week where it was revealed that they have that 85% of their graduates don't meet minimum standards, and 90% is their graduation record or graduation rate. So 85% of the students are either illiterate, illiterate, or both. 90% of the students get a high school diploma, but the purpose of the meeting was to shame the teachers who were still trying to maintain academic standards. Now you might think that the tone of that meeting should have gone the other way, but that's not the world we're living in. The world we're living in is that 85%, I mean, and by the way, this is not the worst high school in my county or my city. It's one of the best.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
the latest, and Bart can, I don't know if you want to fill in as Jake, but looking at the uh, reading and math scores that just came out for fourth graders and eighth graders, we're perilously close to not just fourth graders not meeting standards. We're close to 40% of fourth graders who can't meet the lowest threshold that we would call literacy. I mean, how are you supposed to preserve the constitutional order if our institutions are failing so dramatically that if the trend continues, soon the majority of children will be illiterate? And what are the stakes? This is to bring it back to the topic, the stakes of the constitutional order. It's peace in the world. It's opportunity for all of mankind. It is rising living standards and peaceful thriving of humanity that is at stake, because these ideas only work if you believe in them. And so, not to be so glum, but the arrow's not looking good. I mean, this is why, to get back to another theme we've had many times, is like, this is why Trump is sometimes right. In a frustrating way. He'll do 99 or 999 completely crazy and insane things, and sometimes that target is actually pointed in the right direction, and he's going to mess it up. But in terms of, he's got all the wrong solutions, but he's sometimes right at where he's pointing that magnifying glass.
Well, but to
I don't
take
want
that
to seem like I'm praising him, but I just, it's
Professor, to take that analogy one further, though, you're saying if we don't have an educated citizenry, the masses might shout hooray all 999 times. Who cares?
Yeah, because if you've been taught that there's no such thing as truth and all that matters is power, then you don't even apply the basic standards of, let's look at what's in the Constitution. Like, because it doesn't even matter. the it doesn't even matter what the words say. Who cares? Why even pretend? This is so much worse than the old living constitution doctrine. You know,
Ah, stay on that for a second though, because that was the divide that I grew up in high
yeah.
school, college, and law schools. Explain that.
Well, the living constitution doctrine you could almost call like the smart version of this, which is to say, I mean, there are smarter, less cynical versions of it, but and so um, I don't know if I probably I'll let me I don't know if I should just be blunt
Try
or
blunt first.
give the absolute best argument for living constitutionalism that I can. So the blunt version of it that would be my criticism is it doesn't matter what the words say, we can reinterpret the Constitution however we want.
Yeah, and
And
I've
that's
had
the worst version of living
yeah,
constitutionalism.
sure, and I
The,
that
but,
resonates. I've heard that 10,000 times over my career. Okay, what's
right.
the best
But
version?
the best version of living constitutionalism is that all law is alive because we're constantly creating um, um, new um, new decisions within the common law tradition,
Mhm.
and we should be able to use all of the judicial decisions that have come along in the time since the founding when interpreting the founding and what the Constitution meant. And essentially, if you believe that there's some sort of ratio, everyone has to believe in the living Constitution a little bit because there are many things that the Constitution did not speak on.
Well, so Professor, let me translate from my experience and see what parts resonate with you. Would it surprise you that I've always considered myself a textualist or a strict constitutionalist?
I know, but we
This is you about me. Would
it
it
doesn't
surprise?
surprise me that because at one time in my life I would have given myself one of those labels
Yeah,
too.
yeah, yeah,
But the problem is the more I've learned, the
yeah.
more I've realized that all of those things, all of those labels fall apart at a certain point.
Of course. But as a
Yeah,
label grouping, that's what I've
sure.
considered myself for the last 30 or 40 years. And here's my nuance is that I realize, in fact, it's a critique I've had of congressmen. I have a couple Constitution copies right behind me. I was going to grab one. But my critique of my conservative congressman friends over the decades is they hold it up and go, "This is the law." Here, this is the law. Just follow this. And I
Yeah.
look at it and go, well, yeah, but there's also hundreds, if not thousands, if not tens of thousands, not tens of thousands, but thousands and thousands of US Supreme Court cases that nuance all of that. And I've been comfortable with our Constitution means what these words say and what the Supreme Court has said over 2 centuries.
Hmm.
And when I believe in a living a little bit, that if we don't like it, we need to change it and put in another amendment to the Constitution. So that's been my compromise or hybrid on how to live life in a constitutional order. Does that make sense, or
Yeah.
am I missing something?
No, it does, and I would just add the caveat that what has changed, and the
Yeah.
reason why I would say is that we've gone beyond people arguing for living constitution, and now it is simply closer to I can ignore, I can pick and choose what I want in order to make any argument I want.
Okay, but
Yeah.
Professor, I now concur with you in the last several years that I've had hundreds of conversations which what I thought were conservatives or constitutionalists or Republicans, that whole crowd that had a legitimate critique against living constitution or liberals or a grand interpretation of texts, and now they don't seem to care either. I concur with that. I've seen that in my real life.
Yeah, but what I mean, Bart just turned his camera off, and I was about to put him on the spot here. Like here we're
That's okay. Go
this
ahead.
back
Go
and
ahead.
forth, and I thought, this is the stuff where we should be asking Bart. Uh,
See, I'm trying to be Jake, but I'm not very good.
yeah, yeah, but what I have will always acknowledge is that where the play in the joints comes is the play in the joints is supposed to come from court decisions and from legislatures.
Right.
It's not supposed to come from people ignoring the law because they don't like it.
Right.
And so I feel like something sort of happened in the late 90s, early 2000s, that became the more common definition of acceptable executive power. And it's so far away from what Ulysses S. Grant said. I mean, sometimes Ulysses S. Grant, his inaugural address said, "I know of no method to secure the repeal of bad or obnoxious laws as their stringent execution. All laws, whether they meet my approval or not, will be like enforced." You know, and now we have had a series of presidents who just ignore the laws they don't like. And
So, Professor,
it erodes the constitutional order.
we've had this conversation in the past, but I'm still trying to suss it out or find a stronger path, which is why I'm repeating parts of this conversation from previous conversations. We all break the law a little.
Yeah.
Speeding is the most common accepted. Almost everybody will break the law a little bit. Not everyone, but most people. Ulysses S. Grant would say, no, put a cop there and give them all tickets until they increase the speed limit because we're all so frustrated about the low speed limit, right?
Yep.
Okay, so we're all tolerant a little bit. But doesn't there have to be on big issues, murder and war, and doesn't there have to be someone who's willing to sit in the front of the bus or the back of the bus, whatever the law says you can't do,
Yeah.
to civil disobedience, to break the law, to get the case to be even to go to the Supreme Court. I mean, or to get the legislature to react because it was an unjust law. That's the topic of today: is what's the role of citizens and how do we have a better guiding path to understanding our role in society?
Well, we all understand that nobody wants a pedantic,
What's pedantic mean?
yeah.
Sorry.
Oh, just like a overly precise um,
Thank you.
reading of it and enforcement of every law. That's an obvious impossibility.
Right.
So to take that extreme off the table. But eventually a difference in decree becomes a difference in kind, just because we understand that the district attorney for your county has limited resources and must prioritize which cases to prosecute. That's a perfectly legitimate authority, and I think it's what most people would want their district attorney to do.
Called prosecutorial discretion.
Yeah, but when they come out and say, because I have this authority, just know that I'm not going to prosecute a lot of crimes just because I don't like them. That's nullification. That's the path to civil war. And when people stopped caring about those things just because they supported the issue, that's when I was concerned. I supported gay marriage, but I didn't support nullification. I even supported breaking the law on purpose. I said, yes, absolutely, break the law on purpose and suffer the consequence. But what I didn't support was people saying, I'm just going to, say that the law doesn't exist. Same with I was pretty sympathetic, although, I'm on the fence with legalization of marijuana or, how it could be decriminalized, but I'm just always open to those arguments. But what I wasn't on board with is people saying, we are just going to declare that we're not going to enforce federal law in California. And what you saw over and over again was that people were fine with it as long as it was an issue they supported. And all of these things were reinforcing something in the legislature that said, oh, we have this new magical tool and now we don't have to do the hard thing anymore. Because the hard thing would be coming up with a law trying to convince someone who disagrees with you to agree with you.
Mhm.
That's the hard thing. That's what legislatures are supposed to do. Make an argument in court in front of a judge. That's the hard thing to do. You want to know what's really easy? Waving a magic wand and saying, you know what you can do? Instead of doing the hard work of making your case before a judge or achieving a compromise with somebody who disagrees with you, go home, make a speech based on your own moral purity, and we're going to achieve this result without using the legislature or the courts.
So now let me go into a couple points of substance just to be illustrative of your point. Roe v. Wade.
Okay. What about
Well, that's exactly what you're talking about. They
Mhm.
couldn't get a law passed, so they figured out a way to create a constitutional right of privacy and put it under, I think, the 14th Amendment, which infuriated conservatives for the last 60 years.
Well, I think that it's funny because I think that the abortion distortion is not just something that happened to Democrats, it's also something that happened to Republicans, and it made them ignore the natural. It's funny because everybody running around today calls themselves like a natural law, integralist and all this stuff, but it made us. Now nobody's arguing for the founding as it was, which is the idea that the national government was based on the idea of freedom. And that is an argument that is inconvenient for people who want to make sure everyone can have an abortion, and then for everyone who wants to make sure that nobody can have an abortion. And what we saw is, in some ways, the political and the legal system kind of working the way they were supposed to on this issue when we finally got some back and forth on it. But it certainly didn't seem like the system was working for years um, when
Mhm.
when the courts had essentially short-circuited the legislative and legal decision. Because here's another thing, like they just, I mean, I would just, I think we do have a right to privacy. Like we have a lot of rights that aren't enumerated in the Constitution. It's not it. Your right to privacy isn't invented. You can root that. You can say, looking at text, history, and tradition, that Americans have a right to privacy.
Mhm.
And and that the specific reason why Federalists objected to the Anti-Federalists was because they were worried about just this thing, that once you start enumerating rights, people are going to assume those are the only ones you don't have, which is not true.
Mhm.
You
But
know,
it's
everybody
just
wants to talk about the First Amendment, and nobody wants to talk about the Ninth and 10th. You
so,
know,
but Professor, if and this may be a question for Bart rather than you, but if it's a great is a weird word. It's a really intriguing, important discussion you're making. So I need to ponder more on it because I haven't given a huge amount of thought on that. But unless it's written somewhere in Constitution, in statute, in ordinance, how is it justicable? How do you sue to protect your right of privacy unless there's a prohibition against or allowance for? I mean, it makes it so fuzzy, a right of privacy, by example, that how do you protect that right?
well, we were founded by a bunch of radicals who actually believed that human beings could be free. you know and they also believe that you didn't really get to impose your views on others. I find this, I mean, while we're just like listing my grievances against every group, this is something that, and it's funny because Republicans do this in their way and Democrats do it in their way, but it's the same thing that they do. um, they assume that, like, if let's say you're an evangelical Christian, right? Or let's not even say evangelical, you're just a Christian, right? And Christian teachings say, you must love thy neighbor, you must care for your neighbor, right? And you say, okay, well, then how, as a Christian, can you oppose a law that, feeds the hungry? you're a hypocrite. And the answer is because that's my personal responsibility. I don't have the right to impose that responsibility on someone else. And it's an abdication of my responsibility as a Christian when I pretend like that thing is done just because it's in the law now. And there's this assumption that somehow you're a hypocrite if you don't impose your views on others.
So if you're not
And
in
I
favor
find
of
that just
mandatory school lunches at the federal level, then you're a hypocrite, right?
right, and that somehow part of having sincere beliefs must be that I must force you to agree with me through the law, or I'm some sort of hypocrite. Like, I don't know. I can still believe in something and also believe that I don't have the right to force this on someone else. I can say and act in my own classroom. I can say, I think the best way to teach history is this. And it's a denial of reality if I say otherwise, because otherwise, why would I be doing it this way? I obviously believe it's the right way to do it because it's the way that I'm doing it in my classroom, right? But I can also hold as a belief that the history professor next to me also has the right to teach history the way that he or she sees fit. Like, I don't have to actually impose my view on that person. Does that make sense? I'm not being a hypocrite if I don't fight to try to have some sort of mind control. Because the next thing that happens is, even after you pass a law, then the next thing you go for is like, well, that's not good enough because it's not fixing the problem. So now we have to worry about like controlling their minds. And you're like, we've now gone out to la la land.
Mhm.
You know what?
Yeah.
Let me interject here, and
Yeah.
this is not with a legal thing, and you guys are going to laugh. Somehow, Turning Point USA sent me their pocket constitution.
Wow.
I don't know why they sent it to me, but they did. And
You're on a list.
I
Well,
know I'm on a list.
Charlie
I'm
likes
on a
Bart.
list. What's that?
Charlie likes you.
I guess so. But I have to give credit where credit is due. When I first got this, I thought, oh my God, I got to throw it away. And then I thought to myself, well, wait a minute, what does it actually say? So I read through it and I said to myself, well, okay, what the hell? The only objection I have to it is that they put the Constitution in. There's kind of the real Constitution is over here, I think. And then underneath it, they define a lot of terms. And at first I thought, oh God, so that's how they're getting people. It's through these definitions. But the more I've read the definitions, it's kind of like, well, whatever.
Yeah.
There's not ideology going on here. And okay, good for them.
Yeah.
I'll use this. I don't care.
Right.
My point here is, though, I've come to believe, I've been, because of like the last 10 years, I guess, I've been questioning, all right, where do I fit in politically, personally?
Yeah.
And I think where I fit in is kind of very much like Stephen, very much like you, John. I believe in the decision-making power of the processes that we have. And I believe in the decision-making processes that, frankly, are in the US Constitution, and in our case here in Colorado, our state constitution. There are times where I participate in those processes and I'm disappointed. The people who are the decision makers at that moment decide something different. And you know what? That's okay. Because that's the way it works.
Yeah.
And what I'm kind of getting, it's not that I'm getting tired of it. I that's kind of it's like the parent in me is coming out. I'm just tired of this, but I'm not really. That's not the point. I think okay, what's going on now at the national level, to kind of interject our current events into all of this. At some point, somebody is going to step in and say that something the current administration is doing has to stop. And it's going to be very interesting to me when that actually happens, because there's a lot of stuff going on now. I think the other day I read a New York Times article or something. There are like, right now, there's over 200 lawsuits against the Trump administration's actions or something. That's like a gargantuan number of lawsuits.
And
Yeah.
37 have been of his actions have been stayed by federal court judge. 37.
Yeah, okay. But I guess what I'm getting at is what I'm a little fearful of is that I think our current United States Supreme Court and most of our judges, actually, at all levels of courts, they're actually like a lot like us. They're classical liberals, many of them. And what's kind of concerning to me is, okay, what is really going to happen here? Because we have a president who is not a classical liberal.
Yeah.
I mean, he's doing all sorts of crud.
Yeah.
And, you know, you can talk about, okay, recent history and how we got here and everything. But the reality is here, what's really going to happen? You know, I think a lot of what Trump is doing now, personally, I don't believe in the unitary executive theory and all that stuff. But I do believe that, if a president doesn't really want somebody to work for the government, that person probably shouldn't be working for the government. And I know that on the state level here in Colorado, that happens. The governor of Colorado can say, oh my God, I can't have that division director there anymore. Well, the division director just kind of leaves and moves on.
But Bart, that's at a high level, though. They don't. The president doesn't go down to an individual sergeant in the army, or the governor doesn't do an individual state trooper and say that they didn't vote for me, I want them out. That historically hasn't happened for over 100 years.
Right. That's exactly right, and it shouldn't happen. Because I don't think the courts are like in a rule that all of the civil service laws that we've had for the last 120 years are unconstitutional because the president should be able to override all of that. I don't think that's going to happen. Ultimately, it's not going to happen. It may actually, these cases are going to take so long, this could happen after Donald Trump leaves office because, or he dies or something, because it takes courts forever to do things. But I don't know. I'm totally with Stephen on the educational stuff. And we're at a point in our society now where it's advantageous to the government for people like all of us not to really know what's going on. Like all of the stuff Elon Musk is doing, none of us really know what he's doing because he works at the White House and they don't have to tell you anything. So like Elon Musk, multi-billionaire government contractor, is now going to start getting classified information about the Defense Department war plans.
With China.
Yeah. Yeah. And now I guess the White House has backed off and said, oh, we're going to tell him everything else, but not about China. It's like, well, how does that help? He's also using Starlink in Ukraine. He's turning it on and he's turning it off. And he's using it for Russian, the other Russian areas surrounding Russia. So it's like, what the heck? That's all I can say. What the heck? There's a great legal theory,
Okay, so Bart, you and millions of others have the what the heck is going on in a variety of nuances. So, Professor, give us some guidance on how to be good citizens using history as some things we can ponder to get a better decision.
Oh boy, I don't know if I can.
Sure, in 5 minutes or less, of course you can.
I think that, at a very basic level, that the courts are, because they are anti-democratic institutions, they're put into place in order to, or maybe if that's too inflammatory, anti-majoritarian, right? Institutions, if you don't like anti-democratic. So they are anti-majoritarian by their very nature. And they are able to preserve at least a part of our constitutional order. And so for me, and I think for a lot of citizens, protecting the sanctity of rule of law and our constitutional order might come down. That tripwire for us is going to be if courts are defied. And the nature of what the protest looks like, I think that you should all really think about civil disobedience and remind yourself that civil disobedience means I'm going to engage in a peaceful protest and break the law on purpose in order to be arrested for breaking the law. And know where your personal limits are and at what point you're just going to peacefully break the law and agree to be punished for breaking the law in order to demonstrate that something has happened in your society that 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 regular people need to not go along with.
So, Professor, your blinking yellow light. I don't think it's a blinking red light if I'm reading your tea leaves, but your blinking yellow light is on. I mean, the president himself has said that you should impeach judges that disagree with him. His senior members of his cabinet are saying that the judges are unelected. They're not empowered to overturn the president of the United States or handle foreign policy. I mean, it is all over conservative media about how wrong the judiciary is and how dangerous the judiciary is to democracy. So your blinking yellow lights are on, right? You're concerned.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, my blinking yellow light, my yellow light came on in, 1994.
Yeah.
It started blinking in 2002, 2006. Actually, I guess it started blinking probably in the Florida election, 2000 election.
Mm-hmm.
That's when it probably started blinking.
Bush v. Gore, you mean?
Yeah, Bush v. Gore. I was really taken aback by many things that took place in Bush v. Gore. And then to see the same people who argued one thing in 2000 argue exactly the opposite under Obama and Trump and Biden. Or the same thing, I mean, I guess Hillary Clinton, when she was on the legal team of Peter Rodino, during Watergate, said the president should be impeached for lying to the American people. And then when it was her husband, she had a different view. So, you could say she evolved on the issue, or maybe it looks like cynical or self-interested. But then for people to sit up and shout about how much character matters when criticizing Bill Clinton, and then to argue that character doesn't matter. Each one of these things, the light's getting a little brighter and it's blinking a little faster. And it was blinking pretty fast during the, I guess I'd say late Obama, Obama's second term, when he said phone and pen, and how he and the press responded to Benghazi, it was blinking. And then the other thing that really that was really, I think, underreported and underappreciated still today, and this is going to sound strange because we criticize Trump so much. I think he actually does have a pretty good case against that one law firm. Not all of them, because it's clear that he's just going after political enemies. But that one law firm is the law firm that laundered intel on behalf of the Democratic Party in order to misrepresent information to a FISA court. So it's like you actually could make a pretty strong case that that law firm did something really, really, really bad. Uh, maybe under the direction of the Obama administration, or certainly people who were in the Obama administration and connected to the Hillary Clinton campaign. Uh, and that it was, oh my, if that the
Is this
it's
I
through,
haven't read this case or studied this. Is this the Perkins Coie?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I mean, everything else is just completely insane targeting and all of that. But like I said, sometimes Trump actually does have the right target, and he is uncovering something that was outrageous at the time and is still outrageous.
We're going to wind down here soon. So let me try to get this question in. Sorry to interrupt in mid thought. Um, I have this crazy idea, Professor, that we should pause and just figure out, well, okay, when we see a wrong as an individual citizen or a group of citizens, and we see something that just seems unjust, whether it's big stuff like war overseas or the local thug in the neighborhood or some kid's bike gets stolen. I mean, just from little grievances to big grievances. We should figure out how we want to remedy that concern. And do we want to just go use our fist? And the answer is occasionally that could be appropriate, especially if the criminal's breaking down your door. You should use more than your fist. If you're in your own home and they're got a weapon, you should be able to kill them. So that law in Colorado seems just to me, the Castle Doctrine. But when things aren't just, how do we want to solve it? What are the mechanisms we want to set up and solve? And who do we want that judge and jury to be? And in my mind, we don't have to reinvent the wheel from scratch. We have a perfectly good system. We have to kind of go back to it. So, and that's the Constitution and federal laws and the 10th Amendment and what's reserved not to the federal government goes to the states or to the people. I mean, there's lots of stuff that's really sound in our democracy. We kind of need to protect that. Where am I wrong? What would you suggest we do that is different than respecting our current constitutional order? And when we see things we don't like, make a constitutional amendment or create Congress do your job or you're going to have to raise your taxes because the federal government's lowering the money they're giving to you. So talk to me, talk to us. What are we supposed to do as citizens?
Oh, I mean, I don't disagree with any of that. I think that, but part of the only modification or addendum I'd make to it is that spend some time examining your own moral threshold, and I would also say maybe the first thing to commit yourself to is that you're going to be committed to principles, not issues. That was one of the things that originally attracted me to conservatism over liberalism, was that liberalism, for all of its glory, it is ultimately based on, enacting the will of the majority, and they were very upfront. And at the time of the founding of the Democratic Party, we're here, and we believe as a governing principle that whatever issue the people are for is what we should be for. And I always thought, I rejected that as a premise for what a political party should be doing. And I still do. And I think that people, instead of thinking about issues that should become dedicated. I mean, this is actually similar to a speech that I used to give on why you should become a Republican. So nostalgic for those days. But because we want to be people who are committed to governing principles, not issues. And we want to be the ones who are committed to the preservation of the enactment of the ideals of the Declaration through the vehicle of the constitutional order. And
Go Abraham Lincoln.
yeah, but this also means that I'm not a textual, I'm what Lincoln said when he was a Whig before he had made the full conversion was that the proper role of government is to do for a community of citizens what they cannot do so well for themselves in their separate but individual capacity. And in all other things, government ought not to interfere. Let's just if this so I'm not against government at all levels. I just want people to say, like, is this something I can do myself? No, it isn't. Well, is it something I can do with my neighbors? Then let's do it with my neighbors. If do we need the city council? Do we need the county? But just start with the premise that it's not a rejection of majoritarian democracy. It's just um, a commitment to majoritarianism at the smallest possible level uh, in order to make sure that we're preserving the freedoms of other people. And then what you really want the federal government doing more than any other entity is you want the federal government being the one to protect your rights. Like, that's what they should be focused on. I would love it if we had, if the best funded part of our government was a robust Justice Department that was actually just protecting the rights of all Americans and making sure that equality of opportunity was a living fact for every American. Like, I mean, that would be my dream.
But Professor, it gets really sticky really quick because when you say that, the role of the government, federal government should protect rights. Well, we can go right to the first 10 amendments to the Constitution: freedom of speech and freedom of assembly. I mean, and freedom of association. I mean, so all of a sudden you can be in some weird, wacko, racist group or say horrible, mean-spirited things, or I mean, people do stupid stuff.
Yeah.
Uh, and then we have to defend the rights of really things that we'd rather not defend. I mean,
Well, I can't remember who the Justice Department official was, but I heard Sarah Isgur quote this guy. It was one of the former uh, deputy directors of the Justice Department that said that the rules are for the edge cases. That's when you adhere to the rules, because those are the times when you need to say, look, this is what the rules are for. It's not for the easy cases, it's for the hard ones.
Fascinating. Okay. There were some things I missed. I guess I really want to emphasize this. Would you agree with this? That most countries around the world, still to this day, and definitely throughout history, are really kind of ruled by a powerful family of one stripe or another, and they're willing to use brute force in order to keep that power within their family. Do you agree with some version of that?
Well, it depends on if you're defining it by countries or population, because believe it or not, by most measures, we get a lot of small countries. And China throws off the numbers, I think it's fair to say that most people on Earth are still living under arbitrary rule. How about that?
Well, but the arbitrary rule isn't just arbitrary because it doesn't sound very significant. This could be if you say something against the ruling party, you have a chance of being killed.
Yes, that's what I mean by arbitrary.
Well, yeah, but arbitrary.
There's no rule, but I'm always conscious of how my old professor used to talk about how totalitarianism actually works in practice.
Okay, say it.
In the totalitarianism works like a searchlight, meaning that Donald Trump is a bad totalitarian because he can't actually execute any of his plans because he's incompetent. But let's say you had a more competent totalitarian leader. Everyone is afraid of being noticed, and that changes the behavior of everyone. But you don't punish everyone. But the terror works by shining a spotlight on a certain group of people and punishing them. And That's more like how much of the world functions. That it is that if that spotlight happens to shine on you, you have no recourse.
Well,
So you know that at some level, yes, they could just murder me and get away with it.
well, but Professor, my liberal friends who keep declaring on Facebook every day that our democracy is over. We literally no longer have a democracy because of about 5 or 10 things the Trump administration has done, including a pretty powerful case by Sarah Longwell, I think it was, saying the law firm case is the most scary thing that's happened so far because if you can't hire a lawyer to defend yourself, it doesn't matter what the rest of those rights are guaranteed in the Constitution. So you gave a case where maybe he's right, but do you?
Right, but I want to make it clear. She's right about all the other ones, as far
Yeah,
as I know.
yeah, okay,
So yes, she's right in principle
okay.
that, yeah, but I don't, like I said, my only qualification is that this, the stopped clock is right once a day.
Right. Well, but Professor, aren't you? Because I'm constantly accused of this, of being not dramatic enough about the Trump administration. Because here's a positive. As somebody says, "Hey, can you occasionally say something positive about the Trump administration?" So here's one. I am so intrigued by all that stuff he keeps throwing out that instead of reacting to it, I actually feel like I need to do some research because I've never thought about that before. Well, maybe an oral dictate from a judge isn't the force of law. Maybe it needs to be a written decision when the planes need to be turned around. My reaction is I have to think and I have to research. I have to see what other people are saying. I can't just react to it like Trump bad. I have to kind of go, well, why was that inappropriate or wrong? And I'm not sure. I have an inclination, but I'm not sure about literally hundreds of things in the first 60 days. I think that's neat. It's exciting to be intellectually stimulated by the president.
I guess I prefer a little less excitement.
Okay. Well, aren't you being the same that I am, though? You're not shouting from the rooftops on how much danger our society is in.
I'm not shouting from the rooftops because I want to preserve my voice. If
Mm.
if I'm there's a good
Really
reason
good
why
cut.
Boy Who Cried
Did
Wolf
you write that quote, or is that a famous quote?
no, I was just replying to what you said. So
I'm
you
not,
asked why I wasn't shouting in the rooftops, and that's the reason why.
because
Uh,
I wish to preserve my voice, though. That's a really good quote.
oh, thank you. No, that was just me answering your question. Uh, and then, yeah, I was just going to explain it. We all hopefully know the story of the boy who cried wolf, which is that you want to preserve your, you want people to listen to you when you haven't been the one who has fallen down every rabbit hole. I mean, I remember, but the other thing is, like, it doesn't really work. you know I remember when Trump was running for president the first time, and I wrote something very bold and clear because I said this person is a unique threat to the United States and to the world. And it was unlike anything I've ever written. And nobody listened. Nobody. Like, there's zero evidence anyone cared that I wrote that. But I wrote it because it was true, and I felt like to not say it would mean that somehow I hadn't done everything I could. But I also hoped that because I was being so bold in my criticism, because what I actually said was like, every American needs to register as a Republican and vote against Trump. And if you don't do that,
I read that.
right now, like, we will all regret it. Like, and I had never said anything like that about any political candidate ever in my life.
Right.
Um, And it's not just so that in the year 2025 I can say I told you so.
Right.
I guess I can, but that doesn't do anything, but you just do it because you feel like it's the right thing to do.
You're saying that when some if and when, and I'm still at only 30%, by the way, that Trump is going to be executing a danger to our country's future. I'm at 30%.
Oh, I want to be more clear. The stuff that is so much worse, what he has already destroyed is the peace of the world. And we need to have a separate conversation on this because you keep asking me about domestic policy, but the thing that he's done already is destroy the world order and the system of alliances that have been keeping world peace, such as it is.
For 75
He has
years.
destroyed the American diplomatic and military traditions, and he did it in short order.
But I thought we talked about that. You're talking about Ukraine and NATO and potential in Asia.
Yes, but I really want to emphasize that that is damage that he has already done. So that's a red light right now.
Yeah.
But the problem is that it's not illegal to do it.
Right. Because there's
like he has the power to do that as president. So there's nothing sort of we can do about that. But that is by far the worst thing that can have the absolute most calamitous, consequences.
Well, I don't know why you don't think offending Canada and with even including threats of invasion would be damaging to our trust and character.
Well, I just don't understand how Republicans are now supporting like the foreign policy of the Carter administration, where we say we're going to reward enemies and punish friends.
Yeah.
And encourage everyone to attack us, and we want everywhere in the world to be less secure, and nothing will happen because of this. It's just like this is absolute chaos.
I guess they've evolved, Stephen.
Yeah, they've evolved. They're all. I mean, this is the stuff that Carter learned to not do this. Like Carter was even backing off of this stuff within a few years. Like you'd say, like after the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, Carter wasn't even doing this anymore. Like you're Carter at his worst. Like, and you're worse than Carter. Like it's a bizarre.
And culturally, he's not just a madman doing this. He's got the vast majority of his apparatus of people that voted for him last election agreeing.
Well, it's not that they agree. It's that, I mean, let's not over-determine the results of the election. The people who decide elections are people who do not follow politics at all.
Agreed, but Professor, my close friends that are former elected officials in the Republican Party, current elected officials.
Let me stop you right there. If they've picked up a newspaper once, they are not in the sample size. They are not typical of most Americans.
Okay, well, that's all true. But still, they support Trump when I would expect the opposite, though.
Yeah, maybe.
No, Trump on foreign policy, not just Trump in general. Trump on his actions with NATO. They are now anti-NATO. I don't get it. I mean, these are.
Yeah, and let's have him on the show. Let's find one of these people and just listen to what they have to say for an hour.
Okay, I can do that. We may have to skip a week or two until I find it. I'm gonna get a couple former state representatives on our show who support or have the exact opposite opinion of what you just said on foreign policy and Trump.
Yeah, I bet they don't, by the way. I bet once we get 3 questions in, you're going to find them backing off of all those positions.
I don't think so. This will be a great show. Okay.
Yeah, all right. The gauntlet has been thrown.
Yeah, let's finish with that. Let's finish with your last statement of whatever it is. In thinking how to be a good citizen, I want us to refer back to our guiding documents in the founding of our country, as do you, I assume. Say it in a historical approach that might inspire somebody to read a book or think about it in a in some way that they might not be. Those citizens that barely think about registering for voting, how should they engage as a slightly better citizen than they currently are? Tell us something we don't know.
I would say I'm going to give you a piece of just absolutely random advice and say, read the biography of Martin Van Buren by James Bradley.
Wow.
Because Martin Van Buren's career spanned so many different eras of American politics, and you will see some of the politics that is stupid, evil, self-interested, vile, bizarre legal decisions, and it might make you feel like maybe we can get through this, but because you'll realize just how bad things were in the past.
Wow. That's awesome. So things aren't as bad now because they've been really bad in the
We just don't remember how bad it was.
Okay, cool. Martin Van Buren by James Bradley.
I think it's James Bradley. So can you somebody Google that?
That's right. Well,
Mm-hmm.
now we're out of time. Bart, don't worry.
We're out of
Okay.
time.
All right, I won't Google.
I'm pretty
We'll
sure
have to. We'll have
it's the
Jake
newest,
weigh in.
biggest biography of Martin Van Buren.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad we had this conversation today, Professor. You gave some really. I am not shouting because I wish to preserve my voice. Love that. So thank you for your sharing your wisdom with us, and hopefully we'll get somebody who will just rip into you with your Supreme Court
And
style.
I really want to, but I think the point is going to be like, we really want to listen to him. Like, let's let him talk.
Okay, and then yeah, I love this. I'm gonna try to do it for next Friday, but we'll see.
Yep, great. Sounds
okay,
good.
Gentlemen, have a great day. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, great to see you guys.
Okay, thanks, you guys.